The Global Business Summit was held recently in the national capital to celebrate the present and anticipate the future. Since its inception in 2015, the Global Business Summit has emerged as Asia's premier meeting place where global thought leaders and experts congregate to discuss ideas and actions for the future. It is an unparalleled gathering where we not only reflect on the past and present, but also anticipate the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead in the ever-evolving global business landscape. The gala event was graced by the Prime Minister of India, Shri Narendra Modi. During his address from the podium of GBS, PM Modi proudly announced that the world has now reposed its trust in India and this is India's time.
देवी और सज्जनों, this is India's time. आज दुनिया के हर डेवलपमेंट एक्सपर्ट ग्रुप में चर्चा है कि भारत 10 साल में ट्रांसफॉर्म हो चुका है। ये बातें दिखाती हैं कि आज दुनिया का भारत पर भरोसा कितना ज्यादा है। भारत के सामर्थ्य को लेकर दुनिया में ऐसा पॉजिटिव सेंटिमेंट पहले कभी नहीं था। इसलिए ही लाल किले से मैंने कहा है, यही समय है, सही समय है। फ्रेंड, किसी भी देश की डेवलपमेंट जर्नी में एक समय ऐसा आता है जब सारी परिस्थितियां उसके फेवर में होती हैं, जब वो देश अपने आप को आने वाली कई सदियों के लिए मजबूत बना लेता है। मैं भारत के लिए आज वही समय देख रहा हूं। और जब मैं 1000 साल की बात करता हूं तो बहुत ही समझदारी पूर्वक करता हूं। ये ठीक है कि किसी ने 1000 शब्द कभी सुना नहीं, 1000 दिन का नहीं सुना तो उसके लिए तो 1000 साल बहुत बड़ी लगती है। लेकिन कुछ लोग होते हैं जो देख पाते हैं। ये टाइम पीरियड, ये कालखंड वाकई अभूतपूर्व है। बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद।
A flagship initiative by the Times Group, the ET Now Global Business Summit has been a pivotal platform for world leaders, stalwarts from business corridors, as well as the bigwigs of the political arena. The 8th edition of ET Now Global Business Summit was also graced by the presence of the Union Home Minister and Minister of Cooperation, Government of India, Shri Amit Shah. Here are some takeaways from an exclusive session, Imagine India Unlimited.
हमारी आइडियोलॉजी के समर्थक और हमारी आइडियोलॉजी को इसका विस्तार करना, भारत के हर क्षेत्र में पहुंचे, ये हमारा एजेंडा ही है। 1950 से है। किसी भी देश की पॉलिसी इंपोर्ट नहीं हो सकती है। कोई 2 करोड़, 3 करोड़, 5 करोड़ की आबादी वाले देश का पॉलिसी भारत में आप नहीं अप्लाई कर सकते हो। यहाँ की जमीनी वास्तविकता, हजारों साल की सांस्कृतिक विरासत, सामाजिक विसंगतताएं, सामाजिक स्ट्रेंथ हमारी, ये सबका विचार कर कर पॉलिसी बनती है। तो हमने तो शुरुआत से ही हमारा एक अलग मत, अलग पॉलिसी देश के सामने रखा था। स्वाभाविक था क्योंकि हम बहुत छोटे भी थे और एक कांग्रेस के पास आज़ादी के बाद का एक बहुत बड़ा यश भी था। तो हमें पनपने में, हमें बढ़ने में बड़ी देर लगी, मगर मुझे विश्वास है कि जिस प्रकार से 2014, 2019 के चुनाव हुए और 24 के होने जा रहे हैं, भारत के हर क्षेत्र में भारतीय जनता पार्टी की आइडियोलॉजी को स्वीकृति मिली।
Next in line was an exclusive panel discussion where Kaushika Madhavan, managing partner and country head Kearny India, expressed his opinion on the topic of regenerate a future that works for everyone. Here are some takeaways from his session.
Thank you, panelists. Really appreciate all of you taking your valuable time to be with us today. I'll set a little bit of a context on what is regenerate. Maybe I want to start with the Chinese problem, which goes, what is the best time to plant a tree? It is 20 years ago. And what is the second best time to plant a tree? It is now. So we are in that kind of a context as we were sharing when we were preparing for the session. Last 12 months, Earth has consistently exceeded the 1.5% threshold in terms of average temperatures versus the pre-industrial era. We are starting to see more frequent and more high impact weather events all around. And interestingly, India is one of the most vulnerable countries. It's rated to be in the top 5 most vulnerable. By 2100, up to 2.5 crore population is likely to face devastating floods at some point in time in the year. About 35-40% will have heat impact. I mean, we are talking maybe in another 5 years, places like Uttar Pradesh, 3-4 weeks in the year, the temperatures will so high that work will have to stop, right? So India is going to be on the receiving end of the climate change that we are seeing. In this context, it's very important for all of us, collectively as a corporate and individually as organizations, to see what we can do. All of us are doing sustainability journeys, right? And some of us are even doing a little bit more than sustainable.
I personally feel that organization has to still dramatically change in order to embrace this problem, and probably, as you rightly mentioned, that the vision and the purpose for which the organization exists has to be redefined now.
I don't think people realize, but on GDP growth of this country, 1% of GDP growth is getting affected because of the tally or the disability index that is coming through diabetes and hypertension.
I think for the organization, measure is very critical.
I think we have to bring the social value of the business in front than the market value. Right?
What motivates industry and what motivates society? Right? At the end of the day, when we look at the policies that are framed and the way industries behave, I think there is one fundamental driver behind that is what do people want?
As I was mentioning, one of my roles that I do is I take up sustainability. I lead sustainability for India. And in doing that, one of the clear challenges I see that sustainability itself is not an easy challenge. I mean, even as we are talking about regeneration, even meeting the core requirements of what a sustainable organization needs to be is not easy. To say that you have to go beyond that and actually contribute positively to society, the challenge is very, very understood. Right? So it is not a natural space to be. It is not a natural kind of organizational behavior to try and be regenerative. So in our view, there are 3 aspects where changes will need to happen. And as Kaushik mentioned, unfortunately, we are living in an environment right now where if we don't do this in India, and if corporates don't take responsibility, at least part responsibility for changing things on the ground, there's very likely to be a situation within our, not even lifetime, within the next 5-10 years, where we find that conditions in many parts of the country for many people are very, very difficult to deal with.
After the thought-provoking panel discussion, Kaushika Madhavan reiterated his thoughts in an exclusive interview with ET Now. Here's a sneak peek into the interview.
Sir, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us.
Thank you so much for having me over.
So, for the sake of some context setting, the term regenerative business is perhaps misused, overused. How do you define it at Kearny, India?
So maybe it's good to contrast the business as usual, what is happening today. Pretty much every corporate has a sustainability program and they pursue profits and growth. The deterioration we are seeing globally, I mean, we're just coming off 12 consecutive months of temperatures being higher than 1.5 degrees from the pre-industrial averages, right? It requires not just doing no harm, but requires active doing good. So regenerate is a framework and a thinking process which elevates the conversation as well as actions to leave something positive for the planet, for the people. So that's the fundamental difference.
You've really set the context beautifully in terms of making that marked difference between what we know as sustainable business practices versus regenerative business. But how essentially are those business practices measured? What are the metrics across which you determine if they're successful ultimately, whether that integration is successful?
It's a very good question. I think if there is a big progress we need to make, it's in measuring how do you leave a positive environmental impact. I think the current measures are not insufficient. And when we start looking at corporate performance, pretty much economic performance predominates measurement and reporting today. We are starting to see more ESG reporting. We are starting to see more triple bottom line reporting. But I would say the reporting of leaving a positive impact on the environment by corporates is at a nascent stage and is something that needs to get fixed comprehensively.
And what are the initiatives that in fact can bring that front and center stage?
The most important thing to become a regenerative organization is start with a purpose. The organizations need to set a vision for wanting to leave a positive impact. And that then cascades into reimagining the operations. And you need to start from how do you design the product or service that you offer, to all the way to how do you manufacture, produce, how do you distribute, how do you sell, and how do you deal with the after-sales service. Just to bring it live, a good example would be Patagonia, right? They use 100% sustainable material in their apparel.
Right.
They've also set up, stitching and repair facilities with the concept that extending the lifetime of the apparel by refurbishing it is doing good to the environment. You would consume less, right? So it goes from starting with the vision that I would be 100% positive impact organization, structuring your entire operations all the way to extending the life cycle of the products you make to leave a positive impact. And that's what organizations need to do.
All right. And so what role does innovation ultimately play in the design and the development of these regenerative business solutions, integrations, practices, irrespective of industry?
It plays a huge important role in every aspect. Like I said, starting from imagining the product afresh to be regenerative, manufacturing it in a regenerative manner, distributing in a regenerative manner. At every element, innovation is key. Yesterday, one of the panelists gave this example, and I'm going to borrow it. It's a very apt example. Mining today assumes the mined ore would be transported in trucks.
Right.
And you're saying the trucks are 30% energy efficient. However, if you use a conveyor belt, they're 80% energy efficient. But to use conveyor belts all of a sudden in an existing mine is going to be difficult because we didn't imagine setting up of the mine with conveyor belts to start with. So you need to start innovating at the idea stage, at the product conception, service consumption stage, and innovate at every part of the value chain to deliver regenerate.
Well, sir, it's all obviously easier said than done, right? So what are some of the leading challenges that organizations today encounter, even if they have the best of intentions?
I think the biggest challenge today is no one has even elevated regenerate as a purpose in their organization. Some organizations are starting to do. We see a lot of Fortune 500 CEOs talking about wanting to be regenerative. So first is having that purpose and vision very well articulated in the organization. Second is looking at the entire value chain, right, from design till delivery and post-delivery activities of the organization, and ask what can I do in each step to be regenerative. The challenge comes, it becomes a very large transformation program.
Right.
We encounter the standard functional walls in breaking through the functional walls and managing change. And that is the crux, having the vision is a challenge, and second, enabling change to deliver to the vision is the second challenge, I would say.
And I would imagine that to get that corporate-wide buy-in, the regenerative solution ultimately needs to incorporate facets that are relevant to disparate divisions of the company, right? So how do you ultimately arrive at that relevance and that common denominator?
I would start with the customer. The moment something you do is super relevant to the customer, every function needs to align because every function is in the service of delivering to that vision.
Right.
That becomes the clarion call. And the second part I talked about, leaders articulating a purpose, which is regenerative, becomes kind of a unifying message everyone is, or direction everyone is sailing towards.
And in terms of finding that relevance among customers, how about if we extend that to include employees, stakeholders, and the list goes on? Does the process differ?
I think a very important point that you raise, when we say regenerate, it's not just the stakeholders you touch, but it's the wider community as well.
Right.
Making a positive impact for the entire planet is what is the kind of overarching purpose and the goal of the regenerate thought process. Every stakeholder needs to be thought through. You might have to have a custom strategy in engaging, and you might have a different strategy to engage employees, might have a completely different strategy to engage with the communities you operate in. However, the act of having to engage is constant and going the regenerate way.
And when it comes to regenerative businesses, are there certain India-centric or India-specific strategies that are of particular relevance to our market, or is there a global footprint that the world ought to be following?
It has to be customized to the local needs, clearly. It's very hard to replicate global footprint or templates or solutions in India. Starting with, I think the product needs to design and be relevant to the Indian community. And we've had enough instances of products designed elsewhere not working in India.
Right.
That will apply to the regenerative businesses as well. So it's very custom developed for the local context that each organization is in.
Mm-hmm. And so any parting words for organizations that are perhaps still struggling to find their footing in the context of regenerative transformation?
So I came across this Chinese proverb which goes something like, what is the best time to plant a tree? It's 20 years back. And what is the second best time to plant a tree? It is now.
Right.
So we need to be regenerative now. We are running out of time.
All right. Well, Kaushik, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us, and we wish you all the very best for what lies ahead.
Thank you so much for having me over. I enjoyed the conversation.
The ET Now Global Business Summit has been a pivotal event for the national and international leaders to discuss the larger canvas of socio-political, business and environmental concerns. In a special session at GBS 2024, Nikhil Chopra, CEO and whole-time director JB Pharma, was part of a panel discussion where he spoke on the topic of aligning with global net zero targets, cross-domain and cross-disciplinary approach. Here are some takeaways.
I think by 2030, majority of the top companies have taken the target that 50% of the electricity which will be consumed will be happening through renewables. Secondly, when we talk of emissions, I think by 2050, stringent targets have been taken in terms of how do you start playing the role in terms of controlling the scope 3 emissions, which are not in their control, where you have to get into the entire part of vendor management, looking at the key starting material, looking at the APIs, the active pharmaceutical ingredient which is manufactured, where you don't have the control. But there also, companies have taken the target that how do you take control of that. So that, according to me, is one of the aspirational goals that companies have taken. We being a $500 million company and 50% of our business happens in India and 50% of business is happening in 40 countries. Just to share with the group that in a year, 30 regulators from 30 different parts of the world, they come and audit our factories. So the level of compliance, the level of audits that we face, the quality systems which are in place is what makes us more responsible as a company. That is where we stand. That is what we look into. Two things should be taken into attention is, I think the attention which should be given to the entire aspect of growing economy. You will start seeing in tier 2, tier 3 part of the country, newer and newer hospitals coming. That will encourage more and more biodegradable waste, which we should start thinking from today, because that is going to be harmful to the environment. And equally, the packaging material usage is so big, that also is going to be critical. I think the balance that the pharmaceutical companies have to keep is to continue to advocate good health and equally look at combating to the entire climate change.
Nikhil Chopra also spoke exclusively with ET Now and expressed his thoughts on the issue of how the pharma industry is dealing with environmental concerns and taking initiatives to achieve the net zero targets.
Sir, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. I'm stating the obvious here, but the healthcare industry is hugely driving India's growth story. Against this backdrop, how will the pharma industry essentially better embrace ESG principles in your view? What are the dynamics in play?
First, let me set the context in terms of what is the healthcare industry contributing to overall economy.
Please, sir.
We are talking about $50 billion revenue. 50% of that is happening within India. That is $25 billion.
On an annual basis.
On an annual basis, which is $25 billion, which is growing at around 10%.
Right.
And equally, $25 billion annually is happening what we export. So India, that is why, is called pharmacy capital of the world.
Right.
And 1 in 4 pills which are consumed in US comes from India. And India is the only country after US which has got maximum number of US FDA facilities. So that is where we stand from an India perspective. Within India, pharmaceutical sector is going to play a critical role in the coming time. Now coming to the entire ESG part, let me focus about the entire renewables.
Please.
Top 20 companies, I think the task that they have taken is that they want to get into the entire solar energy 50% of electricity will be in terms of solar energy by 2030. That is where we stand. And coming to entire aspect of emissions, scope 1, scope 2 have limited impact, but scope 3 emissions, which are beyond our control, where we depend upon vendors, where we depend upon the key starting material API makers, there also the Indian pharmaceutical industry have taken a task that also we want to reduce by 60 to 70% by 2050. What I've been hearing, that we want to be a zero emission country by 2070. But we, being into pharmaceutical sector, we work in the industry which is zero error industry. What we don't see, that thousands of batches which have been taken, thousands of medicines, tablets which have been manufactured, syrup, injectables, nobody talks about batches which have passed.
Right.
Everybody will talk about the one batch which have failed.
Right.
So we already are in that aspect in terms of how do we contribute towards the entire society betterment, looking at being a responsible company. And obviously India, being into the pharmaceutical sector, we would like to look at how do we combat the entire aspect in terms of controlling and looking at the climate change which is happening, where pharmaceutical sectors can play a pivotal role.
Sir, I think you've painted the picture beautifully. We look forward to all that lies ahead, and we wish you and the larger JB Pharma team all the very best.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chopra.
Next in line was another thought-provoking panel discussion where industry stakeholders discussed the much-needed topic in the energy space. Here are some snippets from the discussion where the newsmakers have opined on the topic of the global energy agenda, a look ahead in shaping tomorrow's energy landscape.
You know, India promised to be net zero by 2070, all you know. China promised to be net zero by 2060. And USA promised to be net zero by 2050. But then now we find that to become net zero is going to be a profitable proposition because new technologies are coming in. It is not merely decarbonization, but two other things that are going to play a very important role: digitization and decentralization. These two other factors, apart from decarbonization, they are going to play a very important role.
We've got to change our mindset from energy is free to energy is just like data. So far, the electricity grid was always linear. We are disrupting the way the grid has worked over hundreds of years because we are surrounding it with assets, forcing it to now balance the energy resources which are expected to export electricity as opposed to just importing from it. Disruption challenge number one. Number two, diversification. We are all actively hearing about investment promises. This morning, India Energy Week's excerpt in Economic Times said that India is committing to having its energy mix 15% natural gas. If we change to solar, wind, hydro, we are diversifying our energy mix, and we've got to be ready to balance our system of power in the home and in the supply chain of electricity across that diversification. But I will say that diversification is not optional for our nation. We import $60 billion worth of oil and other energy. In order to be Atmanirbhar Bharat, I think changing our energy mix is as essential as the roads we are making. Energy mix change will build the next India.
We're on Global Business Summit, and I'm in conversation with Preeti Bajaj, CEO and Managing Director of Luminous Power Technologies. The Honorable Prime Minister touched upon his Suryodaya Yojana initiative, which is essentially looking to establish solar rooftops across 10 million households nationwide. What sort of opportunities does this bring to the forefront?
I think this is a visionary moment in Indian energy industry. With this kind of scheme, I would say that the consumers have the biggest opportunity. I think the Pradhan Mantri keeps chatting about that you can save money and you can make electricity. We are in the era where consumers can produce their own bijli, their own electricity, and they can export the surplus to the grid. They have the opportunity to be more cost efficient and expand their household appliances by using grid-tied inverters and solar panels. Also, those who are actually in more, I suppose, grid-denied areas where it may not be that stable, there are now solutions available by companies to service them as well. All up, this is a very exciting moment where we are giving power back in the hands of the consumer, be it rural or be it tier 1, tier 2 or tier 3 city in India, to save money and invest more in the areas of life that matter to you most.
Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us here at the Global Business Summit.
Thank you for having me.
A flagship initiative by the Times Group, the ET Now Global Business Summit has been a pivotal platform for world leaders, stalwarts from business corridors, as well as the bigwigs of the political arena.